Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. Hi, so my name is Charles Johnson. I am the lead trainer and technical engineer at LinkSpring, and recently now a certified Niagara developer. So my history in controls started when I was a young warthog. My dad, he is in the controls industry. He was a technician when he was younger. Now he is vice president, part owner of a controls company, which shall be nameless. But yeah, I've been cutting my teeth on controls ever since I was a young warthog. Started off with Network 8000 and even going with the old Host 8000 graphics and signal and all that. And then I graduated a little bit to the M&L series, so the LAN and BACnet IA series stuff of TAC or Schneider, whatever you want to call it now. I also have been I'm Reliable Control certified, Distech Control certified, Honeywell certified. I have a lot of different controls certifications and experience, and overall my entire goal is to be controls agnostic. I don't really care about what is in front of me. I care that it just gets programmed. That's really for me, and what I really like about my approach to controls is that I'm able to relate one control product to another to help people bridge the gap in their knowledge, because I think that's really important. Because some people who come to get certified in my class specifically, they have a lot of experience with something, but not really, anything Niagara. And so I just want to keep them, going. So as long as they can understand, like, oh, this is like a geotree from web control and so forth, it really just helps keep them going. My thing for the podcast is to talk about really all things controls. The main focus is to really embrace what's being talked about today in controls, and maybe even bringing in some experts on some other fields to really kind of get their ideas. We're in a industry where we should be sharing as much knowledge as possible with one another.
I'm coming at this from a whole nother perspective, and it's kind of a good point to talk about how my idea of the podcast is coming into the industry newer, not understanding as much as you understand, and being a voice and a thought processing around the people who are new to the industry, don't know about it, want to come into it, or just curious at all. The people learning, like the people that come into your classrooms. I was once one of your students in your classroom, and I can vouch for Charles. He is a very knowledgeable. He's a wizard of controls. I'm not exaggerating. But where I come from, I've been in the industry now. It's my second year anniversary at LinkSpring just a couple days ago, and I come from a completely different background. So I'm in marketing and sales. I tie the two departments together. I kind of help them communicate with each other, and I also assist with our partners growing their opportunities and providing them with the knowledge that I get from very smart people like Charles and some other people we have on board and other people in the industry, where we all meet up on LinkedIn. The community there is huge. But my experience, obviously marketing, I've been in marketing for about 25 years now, and I came from concrete repair and resurfacing products, which we focused primarily, our niche was in agriculture, so dairy barns and hog barns, and I've been in a lot of situations like that. What I learned as a marketer there, and where I see a value for sharing that knowledge with people in this industry, is that if you want to best communicate the products you have or the service that you have, you go out and learn to do the thing yourself. You go out on the job, you put the controllers in, you wire them, you pull wire, do all the things, get as intimate as you can as possible with it, and that's really where the magic happens in how you communicate this stuff, because you learn the actual benefit of it. Nothing about it, nothing about the controls industry should have to be gimmicky. We don't have to add buzzwords to things, in my opinion. A lot of my interest in this is also to learn from everybody out there, to get questions and help you figure those out, because that's where my mind is at. So for me, that's a comfortability level, but it's like a Venn and we overlap. So where we meet in the middle and what we find in the middle, and we're hoping could be super helpful for people out there that are on anywhere on that spectrum, in between the two of us. So that is my main motivation.
So without further ado, let's jump into our first episode's topic on what is open and open versus proprietary, the pros, the cons, and everything in between.
The term open gets tossed around in our industry quite a bit, but more often than not, when I see it in advertising or reading within a topic, no one really explains it that well. So I think it might benefit some of our audience to take a look at what open actually means. So my first question would be, what does open mean in the context of building automation?
Well, I think that's a great question, and at least for me, a system. I don't know if there's actually a truly open system entirely. To me, an open system would be, it allows us to manage equipment from multiple manufacturers at the same time. Could be used on both like new and existing equipment. I also think that it uses a single software interface for literally all of the controls, as well as giving us flexibility to source customized solutions. And, it lets us choose from a variety of service providers. Really, for me, that's what I think open means. But the fact is, I don't know if we have a true open system available. And I know that seems kind of strange, because I think that, what I mostly described is tritium. But the fact is that a lot of controls contractors have to go to a vendor, and vendors like Linkspring or Distech or Johnson Controls to a point. You need to go to them to buy these licenses. So while the systems seem to be quite ubiquitous now, it really, you still need a license. Someone still really owns it. So I don't know if that truly means it's open. I think it's open enough, but not like 100% open. For me, the way that I would think an open system would be truly open is that the community is the one that is providing the software to do this, which can give us, faster breaks of the software, but also faster fixes if the community, if it's open source. Like think of like AX Community. For the longest time, AX Community was open source. I believe it was on SourceForge.net, but you had a bunch of different people that kind of came together to create utility objects for us to use in our stations. From a Niagara perspective. But like, I think if we had something like that, and then using things like BeagleBone and Raspberry Pi, and have just the source code ready to build your own controllers, where any person can literally build their own controllers and then use that software to program it.
Interesting. There would obviously be some challenges to that, and all your support in that scenario would be from the community, I'm guessing, and that could be hit or miss at times if it's community driven. But I like the idea of the community taking that initiative to really open things up, and that's an interesting idea. But I guess for a lot of us out here, that's not going to be the choice that an engineer or integrator might make. So with that in mind, what are some examples of open protocols that we use in our industry?
Sure. So, some of the common ones that we would use are BACnet, LANWorks or LAN, Modbus, or OPC. Those are the main ones. MQTT is another one that is starting to gain more popularity. I would consider those open. Now, I will tell you, I used to be a hardcore believer that LawnWorks and Modbus were not open. And the reason why I used to make that claim is the fact that, LawnWorks is owned by Echelon, and Modbus, which was created by Modicon in 1979, and now eventually bought by Schneider Electric, because Schneider Electric owns everything. I considered those to not be open because someone owned them. But the fact is, they're widely used among manufacturers, and so I will say that they are open but proprietary. But there's enough of it out there for people to make their own decisions on whether or not that is open. But BACnet is, the standard was formed in 1995, by ASHRAE. The committee was created, I believe it was like 1988, something like that. So, it's been around for quite some time. But to me, those are really some of the main open protocols that we have. Like nowadays, a lot of forward-thinking manufacturers, have replaced their proprietary languages. So when I think of a proprietary language, I think of, old school. If we want to talk about like Barbara Coleman, they had ASD with Network 8000. So a lot of that stuff has been replaced now to seemingly fit into, open BAS systems with BACnet and, BACnet and LAN. Primarily, like Modbus, you see a lot of, from a manufacturing standpoint, boilers, very few chillers. I know Carrier has a Modbus option. TSI, I believe, was their name. They actually did a lot of flow. I think it's TSI. It could be the name wrong, but there was a huge flow hood manufacturer that dealt with Modbus in great detail, which was kind of awesome to see. But you can find all kinds of you can find all kinds of devices like that, like even on eBay, for dirt cheap, really.
Nice. Very. I like the history lesson parts of it. The years of things starting off, and obviously BACnet's still around, so that's been a test of time that people are still using that protocol. In what way do these protocols contribute to the interoperability between the different systems? Like, what's important about open and interoperability?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think the way that I would kind of define this is that interoperability would mean that vendor A with vendor B with vendor C can all talk on the same network without any real issues. That to me is what interoperability means. And as far as open, for those, like, what devices do we have available and how available are those devices with those protocols? So like, so for example, like Distech and Honeywell, I'll talk about those two for a moment. They have controllers that are both in LAN and BACnet flavors. I think JCI, they still deal with a lot of BACnet. I don't know how much LAN they do. I know like their old VAVs were configurable, and some of the JCI stuff was actually pretty much a counterpart of Distech, which was a counterpart of Iconics at one point in time among all the histories. But as far as them playing well together, I really think LAN and Modbus are the ones that play significantly well together on the same in the same network. I have found that I have more success with those from an integration standpoint than I do with BACnet. I find quite often that, like, if I have a hodgepodge of different BACnet devices together, despite being the same baud rate, and despite maybe even keeping the limit to, let's say, 32 devices on the COM trunk, because I may not necessarily know the electrical load of all of them, so you just assume that you can put 32 devices on there when you don't really know. And when that happens, I like to put them in their own sandbox, and when I mean the sandbox is I like to put them on their own BACnet router and just let them build their own sandcastles while the rest of them are tugging along in one aspect. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure.
I didn't know what to expect from the answer to that. It's
Okay.
it's a pretty broad question, but it makes complete sense to me. You kind of touched a little bit on challenges associated with that. In consideration of the challenges around open and integration and stuff like that, what are things that you can foresee? Like, if we're looking at it open versus proprietary, what are pros and cons between the two
Well,
for an end user?
yeah, that's also a really great question. So, like, if you have, some proprietary things, most of the proprietary things that we have now are like the graphical user interfaces. I think among the different systems. So, I think depending upon which one you go with, I think can give you better usability. So, again, if you deal with Distech, like for example, they use GFX. Their graphical user interface to program their controllers is pretty good. It's laid out very well. And it doesn't take that much of a learning curve to build anything. Though, if you're really familiar with Niagara, and that's really kind of your shtick, then if you go with the Honeywell side, for example, where Honeywell's big thing is all of our tool set is in Workbench, which is true. When you open up their controllers, you open it up through Workbench, and then you actually program using their version of whatever function blocks that they have in there to program that. Other things with proprietary could come with, let's say, Automated Logic's web control front-end system, which is super solid, but they also have their own programming interface. It's called Icon Logic Builder. And then they have things like Equipment Builder and even Graphic Builder, or I think maybe called View Builder now. I don't remember with their G5 changes that they had. I think it's called G5. I think it's really up to the customer as far as what they're looking for from from a usability standpoint. Like, how much of this do you want to, let's say, access remotely over the internet? Like, for example, like if you have Metasys, I've never dealt with a Metasys that could be seen remotely. Not that it can't. I've just never. I've never dealt with that perspective. But other things such things as, like, let's say, reliable controls. They use RC Studio to program. Then you have, and you can actually look at the graphics that way. But then you have RC WebView, where you can view the graphics from the front end. Train's got, they have their SC and their SC Plus, and then I think it's called Ensemble now. I think that actually might be their cloud application. Each vendor is going to have their own specific, their specific, what's the word I'm looking for? Each of them bring their own unique, we'll call it pieces of flair to the table. I'll go ahead and bring in an office space.
How many
reference.
pieces of flair are mandatory for to be on the service floor?
Well, was it like 257 for one of them? But and I think it was 22. I think was your required pieces of flair. But point being is that, like, I think from a customer standpoint, you have to. You kind of have to look at where you are in the territory. So you might be in a territory where train is really prevalent. And so, one thing about Train is that they're kind of like a one-stop shop, right? Like they can provide the mechanical equipment, so chillers, air handlers, VAVs, like, so they can provide all of that, and then in addition they can provide their own controls for it, and then their own interface. So, like, that's really a one-stop shop there. So I can see from a customer perspective that's great for them. For people who like automated logic, right? Automated logic may have a stranglehold, and in some areas they do. It is automated logic country. Richmond County in Georgia is automated logic country, for sure. It's very hard to get in there without not being automated logic.
Right. It's like JCI has Kansas City area pretty locked down, and I know they do in other places too.
Sure, and that can come from a cost perspective. Maybe they have great service. The thing about Tritium integrators is that there are a wide array. There's a disparity in quality of work that you find. Now, granted, you're going to find that everywhere, but I think that you'll have a lot of people that just don't like Tritium because, they don't like their licensing, their licensing practices, or maybe someone created a system for them that wasn't very user friendly. And, people who are trying to get into it, right? The advantages of Tritium is that, or Niagara, is that it's a blank slate. But that's also a detriment to it, is that it is a blank slate. So
right.
If so for example, for me, I'm 100% colorblind. So for me trying to be an artist, that's not my thing. I just want to be able to put data together and do that, and let someone else like you go ahead and be the Van Gogh and create the beautiful masterpiece. And so for people who maybe don't necessarily have that, that kind of design, design perspective in their head, they would probably rather go with something else where there's a lot of pre-built things and there's a little bit of customization, but for the most part, gets them where we need. Territory is really important in the controls industry for sure. Like as you said, a lot of JCI in Kansas City, and that could be because maybe you have a few of the owners that have a larger piece of the pie. And so because of that, they've used Johnson in other places. Some don't necessarily even change is huge. And there are a lot of people that don't like change. So because of that alone, some people keep a vendor because they don't want to change.
Right, and change can be rather expensive for some companies.
Yes, and even more to that point, there is a vendor out there who I will not name that actually kind of that has this they have this opinion that the way that they kind of teach people to sell their product is they'll say that like especially like against Niagara that Niagara is a black box solution. And so they use that term in a very negative light. And for me, why is it a negative? Yes, you want to sell your stuff, but no, you can't, integrate their system right away. Whereas, maybe someone with a Niagara front end, and some others could potentially integrate a few other things right now on a budget until they're ready to make the switch. But another thing that I think that from a perspective of open is whether or not you want to be like even protocol agnostic. And I think that's where Tritium and the Niagara framework, that's where it really shines, is its ability to bring in all of these different protocols into one system. And I think that's why most people consider it truly open, even though you have to get a license for it. Now, if you're a partner with a vendor, that's fairly easy. But people who are doing this on their own, trying to be like an independent contractor as a programmer kind of thing, that's kind of hard because now they have to see if they can get it from a company specifically. And every company has their own every company has their own thing that they bring to the table. For example, LinkSpring brings to the table controllers that are flat architecture of Niagara, and so LinkSpring's modules actually don't really require any licensing as far as the Onyx is concerned, or as far as the Edge product line is concerned, that any vendor can use it. Whereas also we don't lock down any of the controllers. You can use whatever
Right.
version of Workbench that's supported, and
Which fits another definition of open in the industry.
I think yes, that is correct. You do have a lot of different. You do have some vendors which lock down a lot of uh, that lock down a lot of their stuff, and I don't necessarily hate that for purposes that every vendor needs to make their money somehow, but it's just how do we appeal to the masses that kind of don't want to be locked in. Like when you think of controls from way back in the day, control systems were really expensive. And I'm not saying they aren't now, but I think from a perspective of what you can get, they are less expensive of the days of old. And the reason why they were so expensive way back in the day was because that when you bought that control system, you bought it for the building. That however long the building was going to last, the controls are going to last just as long. Network 8000 stuff. If you hear any old school person talk about Network 8000 stuff, you're going to find that like a lot of those controllers are still alive and kicking today, even 30 years, 40 years from now. I remember of a microzone that was in the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. And while people were going through checkout, they found that this controller was not communicating. And so they reported back, well, the controller was shot. And they were like, you mean it went bad? That was like unheard of. Like inputs and out, certain inputs and outputs could go bad, but was like one here, one there. It wasn't like, it wasn't like breaking left and right. No, the controller had been shot. Whatever panel it was in, there was a bullet hole through the panel, and so the controller was kind of like just in pieces. But the communication terminal was actually still together. And so the rest of the controllers were still talking while that was the only thing not doing it.
That's wild.
But
Those were tanks back then, I guess.
yeah, but like but the thing is you don't build controllers like that anymore. Like sure you want to, but now you have customers that don't want to be locked into a specific vendor now. So they need a system that's going to accept different vendors without much frustration, without much
Right.
coordination.
That was my next question, was about scalability and how open interacts with scalability.
Sure. So open should allow a great scalability. We should be able to build a system fairly easily of any kind of size that it doesn't really matter. We can add those devices to the network. We can add different buildings to the network without much effort, really, depending upon how it's set up. I think overall, if you, I mean, I hate to say it, if you go with Niagara as far as scalability, it doesn't really matter, right? Like you have supervisors as a front end, and so you can bring in any Niagara controller into the Niagara network, and you just pay for your licensing for some number of devices. I mean, there are customers out there, and I'm not saying LinkSpring customers, but people that use this system that have like unlimited supervisors where they are, they're putting, hundreds of devices in there. As a matter of fact, an Army installation in Anniston, Alabama, it's called Anniston Army Depot, not the depot, but depot. It's spelled the same, just pronounced differently. It's like John Coffee, where it's pronounced the same, but just spelled differently. If that makes any sense to you. But, they have 287 JACEs in their network, and they actually did it across 5 supervisors, one for each quadrant, and then one main one that kind of talked to the other 4. So I think that, as far as open systems go, you should be able to scale them massively. One thing that BACnet claims, BACnet, you can have 4,194,302 different instance IDs. So
that's a lot of instances.
It is. So, for instance, you can have, there we go. See what I did there? No, sorry, bad joke. I will tell you a bad joke I heard that I cannot stop laughing about later on. But you can have 65,535 different networks for BACnet, which is why it's really called an internetwork rather than a true BACnet network, right? An internetwork consists of multiple data links. Like when people from Niagara, you hear BACnet network. Outside of that, BACnet network doesn't really exist. It's really called an internetwork because, one network is actually considered a data link. And when you have different data links, it creates an internetwork. Of course, we call it a BACnet network for naming purposes because everything else is a LAN network, a Modbus TCP network, a Niagara network. So BACnet network just kind of filled the gap.
Tell us your joke.
Okay, so all right. So here's the joke, Matthew. You ready? What is blue but doesn't weigh a lot?
I don't know. What is blue and doesn't weigh a lot?
Light blue. I think it's absolutely hilarious. I think it's absolutely hilarious.
Does that joke slap harder being colorblind?
Yes. Yes,
So,
absolutely.
Are there any other points around open you would like to make before we close this out, or?
Sure. So like, I think that I think what we really need in, out there, and there are different types of options, right? I believe contemporary controls, let me go to their website real quick, get on what I call the Google or the internets. Um, uh, con Contemporary controls actually has, I think it's called BAS Pi, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just take a look at that real quick.
Speaking of
Uh,
pie,
yeah, it is that time for Americans to fill their bellies. That's for sure. Um, Let me look up BAS Pi real quick. Because it
regal.
is, yeah, so it's actually a Raspberry Pi. Um, that actually can accept 12 points. Um, and so, yeah, it is from Contemporary Controls. And, it uses Raspberry Pi, but you can do a whole bunch of different things with this Raspberry Pi. So, for example, you can actually, they actually have something, I believe it's called the BAS Pi Edge series that does a lot of edge functionality. When I mean by edge, like we mean like cloud, like Azure IoT, like software as a service solution. There are a lot of different things that you can do, like even like things like with Sedona, that you can use like what is that? Easy IO, right? I think like if we have a lot of those different things, and people want to, as a community, build that up, like the more BAS pies that are out there, or Beagle Bones, or whatever, and add their own thing to it. I think those could go a really long way, and I think that we're close to people using that. Like the BAS Pi that has the 12 physical points, you can do BACnet over IP or Wi-Fi, which I really like, and it uses a Sedona virtual machine. And so there's a Sedona application editor that it has, and that's free to use. And there's a huge thing for like a DIY there. So like I do like suggest that people actually go there and like kind of like suss it out and see what you can find and play with this stuff. From an open perspective, I think that just kind of bringing it home. When we say open, we mean more readily available, not truly free of like vendor control.
Right. Just for um, entertainment value, what's a use case you think you could use that BAS Pi for, the 12-point computer? Just out of your imagination, what do you think?
Well, first one, you can make a thermostat out of it, for sure, to control like heat pumps. That would be the first thing I would absolutely try to do. I would probably even I'd put it on a compressor. Really, as long as you put like some kind of like ice cube relays there on the outputs. I think that those would be the first two things. I think like some kind of thermostat which can also do Wi-Fi, which I think would be really good, especially like if you want to do, let's say, even home automation, but would still work, I think, from a building automation perspective, because, while Wi-Fi is technically considered bad, in the US, Wi-Fi is a bad thing. You could sell it as a remote sensor that uses no wires. Um, I I've told people that, oh, well, we don't want Wi-Fi here. Well, what about a remote sensor that has no wires? Well, that sounds like a great idea. Sometimes it's just a matter of the way that you spin something.
Right, you're
Uh,
talking to a marketer.
yes, yeah, like I'm not really a marketing thing, but
You nailed it.
yeah, but yeah, you can do that. Um, Offering solutions to your customers is really important, and I think sometimes that we need to go outside of the that we need to go outside of our comfort zones to find out what they are. I think bringing in multiple different systems for people will allow us to provide better solutions for customers. Not just, some people say we sell solutions. No, you sell Distech, you sell Honeywell, you sell Train, you sell Automated Logic. But to even bring other things around like that, I think would actually be really great.
I think you're right. I think the idea around a community um, would push the limits further. I think if it had enough traction, it could make it could change some things in the industry and make some companies that are bigger players in the industry, turn their heads and maybe start to innovate, seeing some of the stuff that hobbyists are just using a Raspberry Pi to make. One of the things I can think of right off the top of my head is AI is obviously coming into play and
Mm-hmm.
going to start playing more and more of a part in the building automation industry, and that's something you could play with on a Raspberry Pi controller and test stuff there. And if you have just people just playing with it at home and fooling around and feeding it AI, who knows what you can come up with. So I love the idea. Maybe we can get the people that listen to our podcast to kind of join together. Maybe we can encourage some creative thinking out here and start working together and just talking and stuff. So that would be fantastic. And that's brings me to the point of like anybody listening to go ahead and ask us some questions. Um, we're going to have to figure out a platform in which to have everyone put their questions. I don't know if we'll just put this on YouTube and people can ask questions on there. We'll figure that out. Um, but yeah, we want to communicate. We want to get other people's inputs on open and other systems and integration questions and questions end users have, and kind of get everybody talking together in the same direction and kind of um, demystifying things and challenging some ideas and just pushing things a little bit further. Because like we talked about earlier in our introduction, that's kind of both of our philosophies, is to not ever be done, always be pushing for something better, better in ourselves, better in the work we do. So if we can contribute to that, I think that would be amazing.
I know that I've said everything, but what do you think open is, and what do you think it looks like from a person who's a marketer who has gotten into the controls industry and is trying to learn everything about it?
For me, open is a value proposition. Now, it kind of is embodied by all the questions I asked you today. Well, really illuminate what what is the value of open? Why is it valuable not only to a integrator, engineer, but also the end user, and also the control manufacturer? It kind of scales the entire like all groups in the industry. Open has an impact on. And from my perspective, obviously, as marketing from a manufacturer standpoint, is scalability, which we covered. It that's important. Future proofing buildings. Well, the technology's moving so fast. Having something that can be just something can be unplugged from it, plugged back into it, and it still talks to it and talks to everything else. That to me is the greatest value in an open context.
Sure. I think that's sorry. I think that's really great because so if we hit like the pros and cons really quickly, we've talked about, sometimes people like a single point of contact for repairs and upgrades. There are if you like for that would be a pro for like a closed system, where where you have ALC, you go to them and they deal with everything, and there are fewer upfront decisions because since it offers a selection of pre-configured systems, it reduces the number of decisions that you actually make about the configurations. But the single point of contact is a con as well. It's what I like to call a vendor lock-in. So like the exclusivity of proprietary systems leads to that kind of lock-in and that vendor frustration, because you really don't have little to no choice in your service plans and even your technicians. And sometimes people want more customization. But I think another thing is limited upgrade and expansion options, I think, is really one there. And, I think if you're limited to the software and equipment available from the original manufacturer, that could be really tough. And proprietary systems aren't always backwards compatible. So as a result, that small upgrade could be a part of the system. We could be forced to do extensive upgrades or replacements instead of, instead because the new equipment isn't backwards compatible with the rest of the system.
Right.
So I think, I think that those are the pros and cons. I think open, highly customizable, which is great. Expansion and expandability, I think, is another one. Since you aren't really since you're spoiled for choice as far as vendors are chosen, you can do that. Really, one of the big negative things about open is that the more of a building management team has to be involved. So it requires more involvement from the building management team, especially from the initial purchasing decision. And then, even in matters of when you want to select the best service technician. So, a lot of that, some people don't like, but I don't think it's that bad of a trade-off, really.
No, yeah. And I think when you consider around government initiatives and net zero initiatives and stuff like that, you're going to be more successful as a end user with an open system, considering those things, in my mind, as that you have the flexibility to change things, put this new super efficient machine in, as take out the old one, and you don't have to redo the controls in the building. You just have to tell it what it is.
Agreed, 100%. And remember, stay curious and be open. Until next time, I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem.